Gilles de Montmorency created a torture device that never actually killed anyone, yet it drove more people insane than any other method in medieval history. The pendulum didn't destroy bodies, it destroyed minds by weaponizing time itself. Victims would beg for immediate death rather than endure another minute of knowing exactly when their doom would arrive. Montmorency's genius wasn't inflicting pain, it was inflicting anticipation. The pendulum was a massive blade that swung back and forth above victims, dropping imperceptibly lower with each swing. Victims could calculate exactly when it would reach them, but couldn't do anything to stop it. They experienced their own death thousands of times before it actually happened. And here's what will terrify you about your own mind. Montmorency discovered that anticipating suffering causes more psychological damage than suffering itself. Modern neuroscience proves he was right. Your brain treats imagined future pain as real present pain, but amplified by helplessness and inevitability. Montmorency realized that humans are the only animals cursed with the ability to mentally time travel into their own destruction. While other creatures only suffer when actually hurt, humans can torture themselves with detailed mental rehearsals of future agony. The pendulum turned this evolutionary quirk into a precision psychological weapon. Victims didn't just fear death, they experienced death repeatedly in their imagination, each mental rehearsal more vivid and horrible than the last. By the time the blade actually reached them, they had already died psychologically hundreds of times. Montmorency had discovered how to multiply suffering infinitely through the human capacity for anticipatory terror. Their own minds killed them through anticipatory trauma. Montmorency had created a torture device powered by the victim's imagination. Modern psychology has a name for Montmorency's technique: anticipatory anxiety amplification through temporal fixation. Dr. Daniel Gilbert's research on effective forecasting shows that humans consistently overestimate both the intensity and duration of future suffering. Montmorency weaponized this cognitive bias 600 years before psychology identified it. Here's how his time terror factory worked. First, he made the timeline of doom perfectly visible and calculable. Victims could see exactly how the mechanism worked and predict their death down to the minute. Then he removed all possibility of escape or rescue, forcing minds to focus entirely on the approaching inevitability. Next came the psychological amplification phase. Victims' imaginations began creating increasingly detailed scenarios of their approaching death, each mental rehearsal more vivid than reality. Finally, the anticipatory trauma became so overwhelming that death itself seemed like relief rather than tragedy. The true horror was that Montmorency had turned the human capacity for planning and foresight, our greatest evolutionary advantages, into instruments of self-torture. Victims were literally thinking themselves to death. Château de Montmorency, France, 1347. Montmorency's pendulum chamber was designed like a theater, with the victim as the sole performer in their own destruction. The massive blade hung from an intricate clockwork mechanism that victims could study and understand completely. Montmorency's innovation was transparency rather than mystery. Unlike other torture methods that kept victims guessing, the pendulum revealed everything. Victims could see the gears, calculate the timing, and predict their death with mathematical precision. This certainty was infinitely more psychologically devastating than uncertainty. The chamber included hourglasses, sundials, and mechanical clocks, so victims could track their remaining time with obsessive accuracy. Montmorency had discovered that knowing exactly when doom will arrive is more torturous than not knowing if it will arrive at all. Contemporary records describe victims becoming fixated on timing calculations, spending their final hours doing mathematical equations to determine the precise moment of death rather than praying, reminiscing, or finding peace. The pendulum had hijacked their mental processes completely. Some victims actually died of heart failure or stroke hours before the blade reached them, killed by their own anticipatory terror. Others went catatonic, their minds shutting down to escape the psychological torture of waiting for inevitable doom. Montmorency had proven that time itself could be weaponized against the human psyche. But the most chilling detail was that many victims thanked Montmorency when the blade finally began cutting them, grateful that the anticipation was finally over. The psychological torture of waiting had become worse than the physical torture of dying. Every technique Montmorency used to weaponize time operates in modern systems of psychological control, but refined through mass media and digital technology to create anticipatory terror on a global scale. From economic anxiety to health scares to social media doomscrolling, Montmorency's time terror factory is torturing millions of minds simultaneously. News media uses Montmorency's anticipatory terror technique by providing constant countdowns to potential disasters, climate change deadlines, economic collapse predictions, political crisis timelines. The goal isn't information, it's keeping audiences in a state of perpetual anticipatory anxiety that drives obsessive consumption of updates. Social media algorithms amplify time-based terror by showing users increasingly alarming predictions about their future: career failure, relationship doom, health disasters, social rejection. Users become psychologically addicted to checking for updates about threats that may never materialize, just like Montmorency's victims obsessing over timing calculations. Medical systems often accidentally replicate pendulum psychology by giving patients precise timelines for potential negative outcomes while removing their sense of control over those outcomes. Cancer patients told they have 6 months to live experience Montmorency's time terror, dying psychologically long before their bodies fail. Financial institutions weaponize time anxiety through debt collection tactics that provide specific dates for escalating consequences while emphasizing the inevitability of financial destruction. Debtors experience anticipatory trauma about future poverty, job loss, or homelessness that can be more devastating than actual financial hardship. Educational systems create pendulum psychology through standardized testing schedules that give students months to anticipate potential failure with precise dates and times. The anticipatory anxiety about test performance often causes more psychological damage than actual poor grades. Instead of a literal blade, modern time terrorists use deadlines, countdowns, and predicted doom to hijack people's mental processes. The goal is the same: turn the human capacity for future planning into an instrument of self-torture that generates compliance, consumption, or clicks. Gilles de Montmorency died believing he had created the perfect torture device. His victims died grateful that their anticipatory suffering was finally ending. But understanding his time terror factory gives you something his victims never had: the ability to recognize when someone is weaponizing your own mind against you through manufactured deadlines and artificial urgency. The first warning sign is disproportionate emphasis on timing combined with manufactured helplessness. Anyone who gives you precise timelines for potential negative consequences while emphasizing that you cannot control those outcomes is using Montmorency's playbook. The goal is to hijack your mental processes with anticipatory anxiety. Watch for the countdown to doom manipulation, being told that disaster will strike at a specific time unless you take immediate action that benefits the fearmonger. Montmorency's pendulum was the ultimate countdown clock. Modern manipulators use artificial deadlines to create the same psychological pressure. The hardest part of resisting time-based terror is recognizing that your own imagination is being weaponized against you. Your mind's ability to visualize future scenarios becomes a tool for psychological torture when someone else controls the narrative about what those futures contain. Montmorency's victims were isolated with only their own thoughts and time calculations. Modern resistance requires limiting exposure to artificial countdowns and surrounding yourself with people who help you focus on present reality rather than manufactured future fears. Your imagination is more creative at inventing suffering than reality is at delivering it. Don't let anyone turn your mind into their pendulum chamber. Gilles de Montmorency tortured thousands of people without ever touching them, using their own minds as weapons against themselves. His time terror factory is still operating today in every system that profits from your anticipatory anxiety about manufactured deadlines and artificial urgency. Robert Greene warns about those who manipulate through fear, but Montmorency's story reveals something more insidious. The most effective fearmongers don't threaten you directly. They teach you to torture yourself with anticipated consequences that may never arrive. In the comments, share a time when you recognize someone was using artificial deadlines or countdown pressure to manipulate your behavior. What made you realize they were weaponizing your anticipatory anxiety rather than providing legitimate time-sensitive information? Your awareness could help someone else escape their own pendulum chamber. Hit subscribe because we're exposing how history's most sophisticated psychological weapons are being used to hijack your mental processes today. Every story reveals another way people are taught to torture themselves with their own thoughts. And every understanding gives you more power to control your own mind. Montmorency's victims died grateful that their anticipatory suffering was ending. You don't have to make the same mistake. Your imagination belongs to you, minds. Don't let anyone turn it into a weapon against yourself. The pendulum never had to reach them. Their own minds did all the work. Make sure your mind works for you, not against you.